Los Angeles, 1932. Not yet the city of the future. And that totally jumped to the wrong place. Not yet the city of the future. Still firmly Hollywood. Citrus, sunshine, a good place to recover from tuberculosis if you read the right leaflet. In the midst of a depression. Los Angeles is faring a bit better in 1932 than the rest of the country. Some of that Los Angeles is long since past, but some is very much still present. You can still go to the same bar at the Biltmore that Les Paul played in 1930, which I imagine that electric guitar in 1930 must have sounded like something that came off the moon. You can still get a martini at Musso's and Frank's. I did that last month. Until the recent plague, you could still get lunch at La Golondria, open since the 1930s on Olvera Street. I, once, at about the age of 12 with my mom, were walking through downtown and heard a very British man with a camera very prominently around his neck, a big silver sort of clunk, step out of a tour bus and say, "I just must have another one of those taquitos." Just feign in the British accent yourself, because I'm not going to try it. It was hilarious. Los Angeles really is a geography in a vacuum, with an idea that will become whatever you want it to be, whatever is convenient. Or at least one would think that from its own propaganda. Broadcasting would replace the celluloid news shipped in cans. Bing Crosby croons from the crossroads of the world at Hollywood and Vine. As per past and present, Los Angeles is shaping the narrative of Los Angeles. Clean, new, bright. The promised land of Minerva, fully born out of nothing into adulthood. Or at least that's what the pictures in the radio would tell you. You are listening to Los Angeles. This is Los Angeles in 1932. The Olympics are happening. I'm not going to lie, I threw this in partly just because it's a mini golf course, for fuck's sake. And I mean, tell me that does not look better than half the modern architecture that's excremented out these days. But mini golf was actually a huge fad. There's the Olympics and there's mini golf because everybody can be an athlete, right? It's Los Angeles. Everybody is somebody. This site would later become another use, a modernist bank headquarters building of moderate note, designed by Perea, and eventually a very specific kind of celebrity at La Cienega and Wilshire and Beverly Hills, the head of Larry Flynt Publications and Hustler magazine. So not everything is the same. Meanwhile, at the same time in Los Angeles, United States citizens are being deported to Mexico for the sin of singularly being, well, of Mexican descent, for being brown. But Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks are playing golf. I mean, they're putt-putting, it's great. This is the dream. Los Angeles was American as apple pie. Think Art Deco refreshment stands, Coca-Cola, Farmer John hot dogs. Not communism, red soldiers, dead bodies, and war. That was Russia. That was Mexico. That's not Los Angeles. Meanwhile, an actual Mexican arrives in Los Angeles, David Alfaro SIQUEIROS, guest of some of these Los Angeles media propagandists, specifically a film director, Dudley Murphy, and his house in Pacific Palisades, a place consistently, I'm sure, buzzing in 1930, 1950, 2001 when I was there, and at least according to Google Street View, still today, there's a picture of the house where this mural was painted that I'm going to talk about that has a construction truck in front of it. It is the constant reshaping of a space to someone else's creature comforts. I don't like the color of that tub. We have to take it out. It's Pacific Palisades. SIQUEIROS is introduced to the art establishment in Los Angeles, the Stendhal Gallery in the Ambassador Hotel, which is no longer there, the Kennard School of Art, which kind of became CalArts in the end, and paints 3 murals in Los Angeles. 2 were destroyed nearly immediately. The third, the survivor, probably the minor of the works, was damaged by his own process. America Tropical was painted on Olvera Street. It was problematic. A mural of a native being crucified while war is the backdrop, not the verdant land of fruits to be harvested and the wonders of tropics that were desired for Olvera Street. A sort of Spanish-Mexican Pueblo proto-Disneyland. Olvera Street wasn't to be a place where to see a communist painter's version of events. It was a place for businessmen to get lunch, to hear some mariachi music, to get some knickknacks for a birthday gift. pure commerce in a historical setting. I just must have another one of those taquitos. That was Olvera Street's demographic. Siqueiros was the youngest and possibly the least known of the big three Mexican muralists of the time. Rivero and Orozco, in fact, threw him a shadow. They were always more prominent, and Siqueiros' bold-faced, capital C, red-letter communism didn't help. Rivero was a communist, but also a communist who'd gladly take patronage from the Detroit Institute of Art and the Ford family, and the Rockefellers. We all know how that went, ending in a pile of plasters somewhere in Rockefeller Center. Rivera, I was casually told when I began researching this subject 20 years ago, wasn't communist enough. And that seemed like a hell of a story, and lo, it was true. Rivera was the sellout as far as Siqueiros was concerned. This is the story of that third mural, partly a masterpiece of its mere survival, and of someone who got tossed into a research project that was never expected, and a topic that I would have never expected to become well-versed in. It is kind of my weird cocktail party trapdoor. If you get on the right thing, I can talk your ear off about this weird mural in Los Angeles. It's strange. I'm guessing a lot of you here identify with that, though. So I feel like one-pick murals were rushed, though perhaps he thought it was merely expedited. Airbrushes, new paints, quasi-frescoes. But one issue here was he was very enamored with DuPont Duco car paint. This is right after the era when you could have a Model T in any color you wanted, so long as it was black. So colored lacquer paint was a new thing. It was a big deal. You could get a blue car for the first time ever, and it didn't cost an extra as much as the car did. Duco is an oil-based paint. And he used it like it was a fresco, which is basically kind of a pigment. And, well, plaster is water-based, and I don't mean to sound judgmental, but it's fucking water and oil. The guy was spraying and mixing oil with a brush like they were ever going to actually mix. And turns out they'll kind of stay there, but they don't really like each other. Street Meeting, another 1932 mural at the Cunard School of Art, was produced in a record 2 weeks. Some accounts say the mural was painted over because of its experimental technique. The paint was falling off the plaster. There was probably a touch of truth to that. And a bit was that in Los Angeles, and many of the circles Siqueiros was running in, well, they were not conducive to communism, particularly how close to the capitalist sun he was flying. Murphy's garden shed. This is a garden shed. Shed! Painted in thanks for an exhibition of Siqueiros' painting in Murphy's backyard, for which Charlie Chaplin and Marlene Dietrich attended, but did not buy paintings, proved to be as politically and conservationally sheltering as it could be. Time, however, makes all objects decay, be forgotten, or become in a state of various ruin. Murals are particularly vulnerable to this, and the roof was falling over a mural, partly that due to its private nature was forgotten. I found this image, by the way, that the curators and no one else had at the Getty Research Institute in 2002. Now, how to move a mural in 15 easy steps. This is the masterpiece we've not all seen, the most pristine, even the least politically charged version of a political artist, free for the taking, if only you could move it. It had been offered for sale by Sotheby's in the early 1990s with no takers. You had to move it. The Santa Barbara Museum of Art thought it to be the ideal place for it to land, except for the rotting building with the stucco, with the mural painted in oil on water, and the plaster over the stucco that was detaching from the wall. And the walls were detaching from each other, aided by rain and garden irrigation. But would I sell you a bad mural? Scrape it off the walls, which is usually what you would do. No, move the whole building. Then the conservators rolled in. There was the cyclododecane guy. I can somehow say that off the top of my tongue as if it's nothing. The kind man from Texas, the eminently endearing house mover, who was like someone had made a real-life version of a Looney Tunes character. He really was. The guy was great. I'd love to have a beer with him. And the local conservative renown. So, in order to do that, there we go. So you put on the You put on the cyclododecane, which is what they were just doing. Then you cover the whole thing in plastic. Then you get some plywood, spray it with spray mount, put some foam rubber on it. Then you get a bunch of guys. You dig around the building because, everything requires demo. Then you strip the paint off the mural because the paint's going to make the next step, well, this is the roof getting detached because, by the way, it won't fit through freeway overpasses because it's too tall. So you got to take the whole roof apart, which is rotting anyway, so that's cool. Then you got to number the bricks. I'm not making this up. This is 100% true. Then you cover the whole mural in fiberglass, which is a thing they picked up after the Northridge earthquake in '93 to shore up freeway columns. Then you core through it with a concrete drill, saw it with a concrete saw so it's detached from its concrete slab that was poured as just a typical garden shed. You weld the whole thing together after you stack the beams in it. And then you, science. Now we're in science. Now you shoot glue into it. That's normal. You shoot glue into it and you drill into a painting. That was one of the weirdest things I've ever seen in my life. Is and then you shoot it full of Roplex, which is still sold by the Dow Chemical Company, but in fact, not only as a conservation thing, but also as a floor coating. So that's how you move a mural. And that's how you knock the microphone off. The mural was then hauled slowly up the 101. It was parked overnight at a gas station at Carrillo and Castillo, down the street from Rusty's Pizza Parlor, if you know Santa Barbara. The masterpiece, $1 million in 20-year-ago money, in just construction and moving costs. Years separated from its creation, was parked like an abandoned Buick overnight to await its new home, the pedestrian-appearing random rectangle, a garden shed wrapped in fiberglass. Then you have the making of the film, which is actually the part that was the most interesting, and this is the part that I got the most out of. Almost no one who's being objective would call this one of his great masterpieces. It's not even the masterpiece of this trip, but it's the surviving masterpiece. Although America Tropical has been restored at great cost by the Getty. They have the money. And you can go see it now. But it is, in fact, mostly just watercolor pigment painted over small flakes of undamaged pigment that was whitewashed over in political hurrah. But the concept of masterpiece is remarkably subjective. But the whole thing was pretty damn exciting to me. I was 15. I got to stay at the Round Holiday Inn next to the 405 in Sunset, which is kind of a weird landmark. When you see it from the window of an Oldsmobile, which later became a plastic surgery recovery hospital, which is probably the most LA thing and the least communist thing ever. And there I was, shooting in the palm trees of Pacific Palisades, where Marlene Dietrich had stood, and in the palm trees of State Street of Santa Barbara. SIQUEIROS, though, a little bit of a personal thing here, he was kind of a chingon. And I don't mean that in a good way, I mean that in a fucker kind of way. He liked Los Angeles, I like to think, partly because it was a place he felt comfortable. Everybody crafts their own narrative. Great. This is him in his disguise after he was avoiding the authorities when he tried to assassinate Trotsky. That Trotsky. Because Stalin told him so, not like, magical apparition said that. No, he was a Stalinite and Trotsky was the bad guy. So, let's kill Trotsky. SIQUEIROS was the leader and there were several men with machine guns and Trotsky was asleep and they didn't succeed. He did, however, succeed in finally getting Leon Trotsky to buy property. He got Trotsky to buy a house because, they'd been renting it. That was kind of a security problem. Sure, let's go with that. And you'll also notice the distant glances of the mural. Like I said, the 1 and 2 times you'd see it were sort of in background. Why? Because this great work of communist revolutionary importance, it is, well, under copyright. Licensing. The revolution will be licensed, it turns out. His big final work, the Polyform, ended up with a wall surrounding it, partly to protect the interests of his patron. Siqueiros, in an attempt to put a good angle on it, said that the wall was an extension of the polyforum itself, not a barrier to inhibit the proletariat from learning about the art without the benefit of even words, because capitalism had denied them literacy. Of course not that. But he was ever shifting in the winds, and he was ever a self-promoter. He even actually, in the span of this and doing this talk, I thought I knew about as much as he could about this guy. No, it turns out in the last 20 years, he wasn't born in Chihuahua. He was born in Mexico City. He said, and when I was doing this, like, oh, he's from the same general area as my grandmother was, as my ancestors were back to at least the 1500s when the records stopped. No reason for that. And it turns out that José de Jesus Alfaro Siqueiros, the David was mostly an honorific given to him by one of his lovers because he looked like Michelangelo's David. He picked that he was from Chihuahua because there were Siqueiroses there who were artists, poets, painters, writers. I'll see it as him complimenting my distant ancestors rather than a convenient fiction for him to latch onto. Another note I have to mention, Murphy would eventually hear the drumbeat of destruction on his own work. His 1929 film, St. Louis Blues, was chastised in the 1950s for being racist. And we're talking it's racist in the 50s. And a group of white liberals petitioned the NAACP to destroy what they thought was the only copy of the film. Now it's in the Library of Congress's National Film Registry for being culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. And it is the only known existent motion picture of Bessie Smith. Masterpieces in many ways are a misguided focus, particularly this one, with its transitive nature, historical terms, and in some ways misguided political history. Yesterday, a Warhol print from a publicity still, a photograph not even taken by Warhol, was sold for a staggering sum of money, partly because someone shot at it. But remember, Stalin's the good guy. How many of you recall seeing a specific masterpiece while traveling? Now think of how many stories you have of the city it was in and the journey to get there. There is a hollow object worship in a masterpiece. I'll argue the masterpiece is what you learn from it, and for me, the richness of experience was not what was in a garden shed. You learn things you need and you acquire a toolkit to explain topics. You don't know how you'll get there. Someone will randomly assign you something. And if you have a curiosity and you want to find out about it, you'll learn you'll get a toolkit that will never be dull. And I remember the people and the context from this whole project far more than the masterpiece. Finding things no one had seen in years, aside from the cataloger, and putting them to use for the first time. And thanks to my mom for letting a 15-year-old go and do all this. Because the liberal arts! And sometimes you end up somewhere because your friend who was wearing striped overalls on a camping trip says, you should go to this lecture thing at DNA Lounge. Which also leads me to a strange thing that I can say now that's actually true. That I have given a lecture on the same stage that Prince performed on. And that ain't me. Which also led, and to quote Arlo Guthrie, wow, some trip. So, to José de Jesus Alfaro Siqueiros, but more importantly, the masterpiece of our history and what lies behind us, within us, and before us, I raise a glass.